Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge story. I worked at an upscale farm-to-table restaurant in a small coastal Maine city as an assistant manager. The owners were successful restaurateurs with several thriving independent establishments, and they only visited our location once or twice a month. The rest of the time, a general manager named Maria was in charge. Maria was intense and meticulous to a fault. Though in her 50s, she maintained an immaculate appearance, always dressed in designer clothes with perfectly styled hair and manicured nails. She had started with the owners back in 2013 at their first restaurant as a server and climbed the ranks to general manager. Initially, I admired her high standards. I also take pride in maintaining excellent quality in my work. The kitchen sparkled. The staff kept everything spotless. You could literally run your finger anywhere and not find a speck of dust. And the food was consistently exceptional. As a regular customer before getting hired, I had always been impressed. When I landed the job in early 2024, I was ecstatic. This place was considered the crown jewel of fine dining in our area. I had a decade of restaurant experience and couldn't wait to start. Little did I know why everything seemed so perfect on the surface. "Listen up, everyone," Maria would bark during pre-shift meetings. "If I see one water spot on these wine glasses today, someone's getting written up. And Roberto, your station was a disaster last night." "But I deep cleaned it myself," Roberto would protest quietly. "Well, clearly not well enough," she'd snap back. Maria was a nightmare of a boss. Her mere presence would drain all the energy from the room, like someone had dimmed all the lights. Her standards weren't just high, they were impossible and constantly shifting. "Sarah, why aren't the napkins folded in triangles today?" she'd demand. "Yesterday, you said you wanted them in rectangles." Sarah, our teenage hostess, would reply nervously, "Well, today I want triangles. Do them all over." On rare good days, she'd lock herself in the office and leave early. But those days were few and far between, and her mood could shift instantly. When young hosts called in sick, she'd berate them mercilessly. "What do you mean you have a fever? This is completely unacceptable," she'd yell into the phone. "Do you know how this impacts the rest of the team?" I once heard a 16-year-old host crying after such a call. If a cook made even a minor plating error, she'd humiliate them publicly. "Is this what you call properly seared salmon, Diego?" My grandmother could do better with her eyes closed. Then she'd give everyone the silent treatment for hours, communicating only through angry post-it notes. As a fellow manager, I was somewhat protected from her worst behavior, but I constantly had to console staff members who'd been on the receiving end of her abuse. All of this seemed like typical toxic boss behavior until our annual staff evaluations. That's when the situation with Carlos began. Carlos was a hard-working dishwasher who had moved from Puerto Rico in 2022 and was still working on his English. Whenever I needed to discuss something important with him, I'd ask Carmen, our line cook, to translate. Maria refused to allow this. During his evaluation, Carlos tried to explain that due to his reduced hours, he needed a second job to make ends meet. "Absolutely not," Maria snarled. "You either work here exclusively or not at all." I checked his hiring paperwork right there and pointed out, "Maria, his contract specifically states this is a full-time position." She glared at me before turning back to Carlos. "Fine. You'll get at least 35 hours weekly, but no second job." I documented this agreement in my manager's log, complete with her signature. Months later, Maria called me into her office in a panic. "Someone's been tampering with our files. All the documentation for our Puerto Rican employees is missing." I checked the files myself. Everything was exactly where it should be. Then Carmen walked in with some paperwork. "Carmen?" Maria practically shouted. "Where are your immigration papers?" Carmen looked bewildered. "What immigration papers? Don't play dumb. Did you steal them? Are you illegal?" I had to intervene. "Maria, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. Carmen is a U.S. citizen." "I know that," she snapped, but her face reddened. "Never mind. Get back to work." No apology was offered. The final straw came when I arrived for my closing shift one evening to find Carlos storming out the back door. Despite his limited English, his parting words were crystal clear. "Racist witch." Maria had discovered he'd taken a second job after she'd failed to deliver the promised hours. She'd fired him on the spot, but not before saying, "You people are all the same, coming here illegally." By then, I'd already accepted another job closer to home. Maria's behavior had become unbearable. She'd once announced during a staff meeting that my uniform made me look like I shop at discount stores, despite being the exact uniform she required. Meanwhile, she'd wear open-toed heels in the kitchen, a health code violation, and once refused to throw out a batch of potato salad after her fake nail fell into it. I advised Carlos to pursue legal action, knowing I had documented proof of Maria's broken promises. The last time I saw her was at Carlos's lawyer's office while giving my deposition about her various labor violations. There turned out to be many more than I knew about. The sweetest irony, we discovered Maria was actually an undocumented immigrant herself, a Canadian whose work visa had expired years ago. She was deported back to Canada, and no one's heard from her since. Carlos received 6 months of unemployment compensation plus legal fees. The restaurant closed that location shortly after. Maria, if you're reading this from somewhere in Canada, I hope you've learned some humility. And please, wear proper kitchen shoes, though I guess that's not your problem anymore. The next one is an entitled people story. For context, I worked at a mid-sized tech company for almost 4 years. The pay was decent. My coworkers were generally pleasant, and the work kept me challenged. Everything was fine until about 6 months ago when our department got a new manager. From day one, this guy, let's call him Mike, had it out for me. I couldn't figure out why. I was always on time, my performance reviews had been consistently positive, and I got along with everyone. But Mike seemed determined to find fault with everything I did. At first, it was small stuff. He'd question my time estimates on projects, second-guess my decisions in meetings, and make snide comments about my work. I tried to brush it off as new boss jitters, thinking he was just trying to establish his authority, but it quickly became clear that I was being singled out. "Your report is incomplete," he'd say in front of the whole team, even though I'd followed the same template everyone else used. "You're not a team player," he'd claim, despite the fact that I was always helping others when they asked. I started documenting everything, every email, every meeting, every interaction. I had a feeling I might need it someday, and boy was I right. Things came to a head 3 months ago. Our office had recently purchased some expensive equipment, high-end laptops, tablets for the design team, that kind of stuff. One Monday morning, Mike called an emergency department meeting. "Someone's been stealing company property," he announced, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "We've had over $5,000 worth of equipment go missing." Everyone was shocked. Our office was small, and we all trusted each other. The idea that someone among us was a thief was disturbing. Mike continued, "I've been conducting an investigation over the weekend, and I've found evidence pointing to one person." He dramatically pulled out a folder. "Based on security footage and access logs, I believe the person responsible is sitting right here." My stomach dropped when he looked directly at me. "I have footage of you entering the office late Friday evening after everyone had left," he said, pointing at me. "The equipment was reported missing the next morning by our weekend security." I was stunned. "That's impossible," I said. "I wasn't even in town last weekend. I was visiting my parents 3 hours away." Mike smirked. "The footage doesn't lie. Neither do the access logs showing your key card was used at 9:47 p.m. My co-workers were staring at me, some looking confused, others disappointed. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I didn't take anything. I wasn't even here." "Save it," Mike said. "I've already spoken with HR and the police have been notified. You're suspended pending investigation. Please clean out your desk and surrender your access card." I couldn't believe what was happening. As I packed up my things with everyone watching, my mind was racing. I knew I was innocent, but how could I prove it? Then I remembered my phone's location history and the toll receipts from my drive to my parents' place. I had evidence. Over the next week, I built my case. I got the location data from my phone showing I was at my parents' house all weekend. I had the toll receipts from the highway. My parents wrote statements confirming I was with them. I even had photos time-stamped from our family dinner, but when I tried to send this to HR, I got the runaround. They said the investigation was ongoing and that they'd take my statement into account. It felt like they'd already decided I was guilty. That's when I got mad, really mad. I decided to do some investigating of my own. I reached out to a former co-worker who'd left the company a month ago but was still friends with the security guard. Through this connection, I learned something interesting. The security footage Mike claimed to have of me entering the building actually showed someone using my access card, but their face wasn't clearly visible as they wore a cap and kept their head down. This got me thinking, if someone had my access card, how did they get it? I always kept it in my wallet. Then I remembered. About a week before the theft, Mike had asked to see everyone's access cards because he was checking something with security. We'd all handed them over for a few minutes. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed more proof. I contacted the IT department directly, bypassing both Mike and HR. I had worked with the IT lead on several projects and had a good relationship with him. I explained my situation and asked if he could check who had accessed the equipment storage room. He was hesitant at first, but when I showed him all my evidence proving I was out of town, he agreed to look into it. A day later, he called me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The system logs show Mike's master access card was used to enter the storage room 10 minutes after your card was used to enter the building. Bingo." But why would Mike frame me? What did he have to gain? I dug deeper, calling in favors from friends still at the company. I discovered that some of the missing equipment had mysteriously appeared in Mike's home office during a virtual meeting. He had been stealing equipment and needed a scapegoat. Armed with this information, I contacted the company's legal department directly. I laid out everything I had discovered, explaining that I was being framed and that I had evidence to prove it. I also mentioned that I was considering legal action for defamation and wrongful termination if this wasn't resolved quickly. That got their attention. 2 days later, I was called in for a meeting with HR, legal, and the department director, Mike's boss. Mike was conspicuously absent. I presented my evidence methodically, my location data proving I was out of town, the IT logs showing Mike's access card was used right after mine, and screenshots from the virtual meeting showing the missing equipment in his home office. I also shared statements from coworkers who'd witnessed Mike asking to see our access cards. The room was silent when I finished. The director looked stunned. The HR rep was furiously taking notes. The legal representative looked like she was calculating potential lawsuit costs in her head. "We'll need to investigate these claims," the director finally said. "You've had 2 weeks to investigate the false claims against me," I replied. "I expect this to be resolved much faster, or I'll be forced to escalate this matter." 3 days later, I received a call from the director. "We'd like you to come in tomorrow for a department meeting," he said. "We've concluded our investigation." The next morning, I walked into the conference room where the entire department was gathered. Mike was sitting at the front, looking pale and uncomfortable. The director stood up as I entered. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As you know, 2 weeks ago, serious allegations were made about equipment theft in our department. After a thorough investigation, we've determined that these allegations were false." Murmurs broke out around the room. The director continued, "Not only were they false, but they were deliberately fabricated by Mike to cover up his own misconduct." All eyes turned to Mike, who was staring at the table. "The company has a zero-tolerance policy for theft and for falsely accusing employees of misconduct. As of today, Mike is no longer employed by this company. Security was waiting outside to escort Mike out. As he gathered his things, he wouldn't even look at me." The director approached me afterwards. "We owe you a sincere apology," he said. "The company would like to offer you your job back with a promotion and compensation for the time you were suspended." I accepted, but on one condition, that the company implement better security protocols and a fairer investigation process to ensure this couldn't happen to anyone else. In the months since then, things have settled down. I got my promotion, and most of my coworkers have apologized for doubting me. The company did implement better security measures, including a new system for access cards that can't be easily duplicated. As for Mike, I heard through the grapevine that he's having trouble finding a new job. Turns out getting fired for theft and false accusations doesn't look good on a resume. The last I heard, he was working retail somewhere. I sometimes think about how close I came to losing everything because someone decided to frame me. It taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and trusting my instincts when something feels wrong. The evidence I gathered didn't just save my job, it revealed the truth and ensured justice was served. In the end, that's all any of us can ask for. The next one is a malicious compliance story. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients, and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers who were well-compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with the nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to a regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on a Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply while noon was fast approaching, so I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her and that I'd created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they are not at work. She told me she got everything under control and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me, "If I take over a task, it's not your task anymore, it's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done." I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it and you don't call me or text me about it. Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client come in with an order. I accepted it, my boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client our boss was personally on it. The task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly not to call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery, and everything at the office was handled, I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she had missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the clients so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I had done was following her instructions. "Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to." She was fuming, but she knew I was correct, and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my batter for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency, and I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. "But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information." I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally, but if she had used her brain like she is constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out. On every single page, bottom and top. Now that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course, I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? The next one is an entitled people story. My sister for years believed she could make a living breeding pugs. She used to have a breeding pair she named after sibling characters, ironically. The first time the female got pregnant, I had to help with the birth. And that pug had like 10 puppies. It was months of dealing with a stinky puppy pen, and my nephews and I having to take care of them while my sister wasn't home. She managed to find homes for all but one of the puppies, and the final one she refused to sell because he was too cute. I knew it. I knew from the start that she'd want to keep one of the puppies for herself. She denied it, but then she did. Just to try and make it look like she wasn't keeping the puppy because she didn't want to sell him, she claimed she was giving him to her sons, and he'd be their dog. That was complete and utter BS, and we all knew it. That third pug was a menace. And it only made all 3 pugs one terrible group of troublemakers. They urinated on the floor so much they rusted out the vents. And my nephews didn't really take care of the third pug, as my sister claimed they were supposed to, as their dog. So she threatened she'd give away the third pug many times, but didn't, and would cry if called out on it because he's too cute. After like 2 years of that, it finally was too much for her and she gave the third pug away. She couldn't sell him like the prior puppies because he was full grown and neutered. Somehow the mother pug didn't have another pregnancy that took until my sister was evicted from the family property. We were kinda thankful for that. I ended up taking care of these pugs as much as my nephews while my sister wasn't home. The first pug that became the papa dog wasn't so bad. But the female that became the mama was a nightmare for a while. That dog developed some twisted need to crap exclusively on my sister's bed. My sister once came home to, I kid you not, 9 piles of poop from that one pug on her bed. I'd see this dog come running into the bedroom after going outside, jump on the bed, give you a look like she doesn't care what you think, and she would drop a deuce wherever she felt like, which would usually be on the bed as soon as you weren't watching her. And this dog was punished for it many times, but she refused to stop. It got to the point where we had to keep her caged, and the bedroom door perpetually closed. But she kept finding a way in if she was let out of the cage. Edit. Just avoid this, and the next paragraph if you don't feel like reading about this dog. Eventually it got to the point where I was taking zero BS from this dog. I decided one day she was not going to go back inside until she pooped, and the dog really did not like that, especially since it was cold outside and the ground was wet. I watched as she would sniff around, make a motion like she was going to take a dump, then would just whine while looking around and move on. She did this a few times, then looked over at my sister's trailer and suddenly started running towards it all of a sudden, with a look of complete glee on her face like she was thinking, I want to crap there. I stopped the dog and forced her to come back. She looked at me like I was a killjoy and just sat down to pout and stare at me. I told the dog I had all day, and she finally got bored enough to go back to sniffing around. She tried to make a break for the trailer 2 more times. Finally, after like 45 minutes, she couldn't hold it in anymore and took a dump, but I could tell she had more in her. So I kept waiting around and she finally took another dump because I wasn't taking her back to the trailer. The march back was like a walk of shame for her because she knew she'd lost, and put up no fuss when I put her back in her cage. I kept up that routine until eventually she finally stopped trying to poop on the bed. Eventually my sister's at the time boyfriend brought home a puppy he got for free. This puppy was adorable, but grew into an absolute monster bigger than my Akbash dog. He was huge and pissed and crap on the floor all the time, especially right near my middle nephew's bed. When put on his tether outside, he would bark constantly. On days I had migraines, this dog drove me nuts, and he made it impossible for anyone to sleep at times. Especially my father. This dog was so strong that he broke his chain tether numerous times. They couldn't use rope because he'd chew through it. He chewed everything. The 5th-wheel trailer my sister was living in on our property at the time she bought brand new, and that dog just destroyed it even worse than the pugs did. That dog also destroyed plenty of stuff belonging to my nephews. Clothes, shoes, toys, anything it could get in its mouth. I had to fix my middle nephew's shelves with duct tape. We told my sister many times that she had to get rid of this dog. Even gave her an ultimatum more than once. But she still refused. She finally sold the dog to someone who had one of the same breed, and had wanted another one, and treated us like we'd ruined her life by making her get rid of this dog she could not handle. Soon after, my ex-Bill took his kids away from there, and refused to bring them back. Not long after, my sister was given the boot, and she was out by January. When my sister got an eviction notice from the family property in 2023, she moved in with her only remaining friend and started breeding her pugs again. And just like last time, she kept the cutest one. Then her best friend kicked her out, and my sister got a new boyfriend who was also her drug dealer and moved in with him. Then her abusive boyfriend kicked her out and left her in a broken-down RV trailer on the side of the road, and then he left her with a car that barely ran. By then, she'd burned like 98% of the bridges she'd had because she's an entitled narcissist. She spent 2 days living with her boyfriend's sister and let her pugs piss and crap all over the bedroom floor and didn't clean up any of it, so the lady kicked her out. I had to clean it all up when I came and got her and her stuff, and then I had to spend a day following her numerous places with all her stuff in the back of my truck while she was trying to find someone to take her in. Most of the people she tried to get in touch with wouldn't return her calls or messages, and I was the only one walking her damn dogs. She just sat in her car on her phone the entire time. And then she tried to force me to take her dogs home with me, but I couldn't because our parents are my landlords, and they said no. My sister flipped out on me for it. She claimed our parents were allowing me to bring her stuff home in my truck for the time being, and her dogs were a part of her stuff. I still told her no, and she lost her mind. She spent the night in a car full of junk with 3 pugs. She didn't even have food for the dogs. I had to buy her some because she was broke. The next day, our mother got her a motel room for the night, and she was completely ungrateful for it. Then she went right back to her abusive boyfriend the next day. I just dumped her stuff off in his front yard and left. My sister finally had to surrender the mom and dad pugs to a rescue, but she kept the puppy. I'd previously told her she needed to give away all the dogs because she couldn't care for them if she was homeless. She said she'd think about giving up the 2 parent pugs, but she refused to part with the puppy. I told her that trying to raise a puppy on the streets wouldn't be good for the dog, and she ranted that dogs were great for the mental health of homeless people and that she needed him. My sister was previously in touch with a pug rescue, but stopped talking to them. I looked this rescue up and gave them a call, and they were worried for the safety of the pugs. So worried that they called me back to ask for or tell me updates on the situation. Eventually, they called me and said my sister had surrendered the 2 parent dogs to them, and they gave her $100 each for them. I don't know if that was a normal thing to do, or if my sister extorted money for the dogs since they were pure breeds and a breeding pair. They didn't clarify. But both dogs were highly adoptable, they told me, and likely found homes fairly quickly, if not even maybe sent to the same home. My sister also had a tabby cat she couldn't take care of and begged I take him. Not only did I take in the cat, I refused to return him to her later. He loves it here, and he was raised here. When I brought him home, he started purring the second I pulled in the driveway, and I mean aggressively purring. He couldn't see where we were because he was in his carrier, but he knew by smell. As soon as I let him out of the carrier, he was running around the yard like I'm home. My sister previously took him to live in a drug den with her abusive boyfriend, and would take him right back into that sort of life if I'd let her. I recently had him chipped and registered in my name, just to keep her from taking him away. She's an animal hoarder. She'll keep dogs and cats, and then just won't clean up after them. And if she has the money or the room, she'll get more. Over 20 years ago, she was living in an old manufactured home with 20 cats she was letting piss and crap all over the place. I had to clean it all up for her many times because she wouldn't do anything. And when called out on it, she'd cry and say the cats were like her babies. I tell you, you don't know nothing about cleaning cat poop till you've had to use a shovel. Those cats were just pooping on top of more poop. It was like shoveling moist clay. At least I clean up after my cats. Recently, my sister showed up wanting her cat back, and I kicked her off the property. She threatened to report me, but hasn't. Probably because we know she's doing meth and crack and doesn't want cops snooping around. When she wasn't looking, I saw the cat run away from her and hide under my house. And normally he's friendly with everybody. Then he started following me and meowing like mad. He did not want to go with her. Anyway, thank you.